What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. It is time to give you my official Big 12 football spring power rankings for the upcoming 2025 college football season. I've already done the other Power 4 conferences. I've done the Big 10 and the SEC. I did the Big 10 from yesterday and then the SEC a couple of days ago on Monday, and then we got the ACC coming up tomorrow, so stay tuned for that video coming out tomorrow. But now we're going to do the Big 12. I'll give you my spring football power rankings for this conference based off of the returning production and what they have coming back and who they lost from last year. So let's go ahead and jump right into these power rankings. Again, we'll start from the bottom and work our way to the top for these spring football power rankings for the Big 12 conference. Starting at number 16, we got the UCF Knights. Pretty rough year last year for the Knights in 2024. Can this team turn things around in 2025? Well, obviously Scott Frost returning as the head coach. I mean, that's definitely a lot of hype for this team, but the question is he going to be able to do what he did when he first came around? That's obviously a big question mark. You go back to Scott Frost's days when he was at Nebraska, just lost a lot of close games. Could that happen here, at UCF in 2025? I mean, I don't really know if it'll happen or anything. I'm just kind of saying that because of Scott Frost's coaching ability. But a lot of new players on this team. They lost KJ Jefferson at quarterback. They also lost RJ Harvey at running back, and then they lost a really good receiver in Kobe Hudson at wide receiver. So quite a bit of losses there from last year, but it's just, again, a lot of new players on this team. The offensive line definitely kind of concerns me because they don't really have a ton of depth there on the offensive line. You look at the defense, a lot of new players there, just like the offense. They lost a couple of good players in the cornerback position. They lost B.J. Adam and then also lost Mac Williams. So a couple of good corners in the secondary. The secondary might be a little bit of concern here for UCF. So, yeah, I don't really know about this team just yet. I don't know if they can turn things around in 2025, but if Scott Frost can motivate this team and get back to where they used to be and make it to a bowl game this year, then yeah, that's going to definitely surprise me a lot here for the Knights in 2025. Let's go to number 15 now. We got Oklahoma State. That, of course, a team that was the worst team in the Big 12 from last year. I don't know if they'll be able to be good this year. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell how good this team is going to be, especially after coming off a bad year. They're obviously going to lose Ollie Gordon at running back, and then the offensive line definitely does kind of concern me a lot for Oklahoma State. They don't really have a ton of depth there on that offensive line, so that's what's kind of putting them out, outside the top, 13, if that makes sense, and then also the top 10. But yeah, Oklahoma State, this is a well-coached team. You kind of expect them to turn things around in 2025 with Mike Gundy as their head coach. Yeah, Mike Gundy is a great coach, but again, this was a team that was just definitely expected to do a whole lot from last year, but they didn't do that. Of course, this year is just, again, kind of tough to tell. Defensively, the linebacker position definitely concerns me. They lost a couple of really good linebackers. Colin Oliver gone at outside linebacker, and then Nick Barton gone at middle linebacker. So yeah, they lost quite a bit there on that defensive side of the football. Again, that's just one thing about Oklahoma State. They just lost a ton from last year, including their star running back in Ollie Gordon. So yeah, Oklahoma State here down at the way bottom of the Big 12. I think they can definitely turn things around, but as of right now, they're definitely near the bottom of this Big 12 power rankings at number 15. Moving on to number 14, we got Arizona. A pretty rough year for their first-year head coach in 2024. This is an Arizona team that not just too long ago in the Pac-12, they won 10 games under Jedd Fisch. But after he left to go to Washington, that definitely hurt this Arizona program. They do return their starting quarterback in Noah Fahey. I think he'll definitely be pretty solid for them. But it's really going to come down to pretty much this, talent on this team. You look at the offense, though, the quarterback position, it does definitely concern me. I know they got Noah Fahey coming back at quarterback, but they just don't really have a ton of options there at quarterback. I think the offensive line will be pretty average, same thing with the wide receivers, but they did lose their top receiver from last year, so maybe that receiving position could be a concern. But this Arizona offense, the offensive line, the offensive line will definitely be solid, but the quarterback position definitely kind of concerns me. Again, just not a ton of options there at quarterback. Defensively, the secondary does concern me for Arizona. I think this defensive line actually will be a little bit better compared to last year, but still, this is an Arizona team that just doesn't have a lot of talent. Obviously, the Big 12 teams, they don't really have any talent on their rosters. I mean, this is a conference that is really a lot of priority and everything, and these rankings were just really hard to do. But again, Arizona definitely can come out of nowhere and surprise a lot of people, but as of right now, I just don't know if they're going to be really good or not. Again, the secondary on the defensive side of the football concerns me, and then I have some concerns about the quarterback position. So yeah, Arizona here at number 14 because of that. Moving on to number 13, we got Cincinnati. Cincinnati, kind of, for the first time, they won't be at the bottom of the Big 12, in my opinion. You look at this offense, though. The offensive line and wide receiver definitely concerns me. They don't really have a ton of depth there. That's the thing about this Cincinnati team. Not a ton of depth on the offensive side of the football, and then especially at that wide receiver position in the offensive line. Now, they do got their starting quarterback returning from last year, but it's definitely about the depth on this team. I do like their starting lineup. I mean, that's kind of what, kind of bumped up Cincinnati here to number 13 is because of their starting lineup. But you look at the defense, the linebacker position is really the only concern that I have for the defense. I think this defense has a chance to be pretty good, but, again, the linebacker depth, position is definitely a concern there for Cincinnati. So I think this team actually will be a little bit better this year, but how better will they be? I mean, that's definitely going to be the question. Again, I do like their starting lineup, but again, that offensive line and wide receiver position, they don't really have a ton of depth there on that offensive side of the football. So that's what kind of keeps Cincinnati here outside the top 10 is because of the depth. Moving on to number 12, we got West Virginia. This is a team that was pretty solid last year. They were kind of like a dark horse team in the Big 12. I mean, they kind of had a pretty tough schedule last year, and they didn't really have the best season. But you look at both sides of the football, they don't really lose a whole lot from last year. I think this West Virginia team on both sides of the football would be pretty solid. Yes, they lose Garrett Green at quarterback, but that's really the only big loss on that offensive side of the football. I mean, they lost some guys on the offensive line as well, but I do like this West Virginia team. I think they're going to be pretty solid across the board. The defense also should be pretty solid. I don't really see any areas of concern there for the Mountaineers. So yeah, West Virginia, they are outside the top 10 and everything, but still, this is a team that I think could be pretty solid, and I think they could probably become maybe like a dark horse team in the Big 12. You never know, but as of right now, they are at number 12 here in the spring football power rankings. Moving on to number 11, that is Houston. Houston, I think they will be a lot better this year. Houston, with Willie Fritz as their second-year head coach, it was a pretty rough year last year for them because of how tough the schedule was. And I think the Cougars have a chance to be really better this year. They lost, they didn't lose quite a lot from last year. They did lose, some guys on the offensive side of the football. I mean, they added some additions in the transfer portal. That's what I like about this Houston team this year is what they added in the transfer portal and everything. You look at the offensive side of the football. They lose Malia Carr at tight end, a pretty big loss there at that tight end position. You look at the quarterback position, Donovan Smith gone at quarterback, but they bring in Connor Wingman, the transfer from Texas A&M. We saw how good he was and sometimes how bad he was at Texas A&M, but I think he does fit well into this system here for Willie Fritz. And then you look at the offensive line. That is kind of the only area I'm concerned about here for Houston. I mean, everywhere else looks like it's going to be pretty solid and pretty decent for this Houston team, but that offensive line, they don't really have a ton of depth there, so maybe that offensive line could be an area of concern. But Connor Wingman can definitely step up for this Houston team. Then this offense has a chance to be pretty solid. You look at the defense, not a ton of concerns there, but except for the linebacker position, the depth on the concern on the linebacker position is definitely not there for them. They lose Cooper at defensive end, and they also lose Michael Batten at linebacker. That's a big loss at that linebacker position, but really the only weakness on that defensive side of the football is definitely the linebacker position. Not a ton of depth there for Houston, but still, this is a Houston team I think will be a lot better this year. They definitely could become a dark horse team in the Big 12. Don't want to go too far, though. But yeah, Houston, what's keeping them really outside the top 10 is probably, because of the lack of talent on this team. But yeah, Houston, though, number 11 on these power rankings. And moving on to number 10, we got Colorado. A team that gets really talked about the most in college football. Obviously, Colorado going to lose some big names from last year's teams. Obviously, Shadir Sanders gone at quarterback, but they bring in Kanan Slaughter, the transfer quarterback from the transfer portal. I think he's going to be pretty solid for them. I don't think he'll be as good as Shedeur Sanders was, but I think he'll be pretty solid for them. The wide receiver position, though, they lost quite a bit there from last year. The offensive line doesn't really, concern me that much. I mean, the offensive line, I think, will be pretty solid for them. And that's the thing about all these Big 12 teams. They're just going to be pretty solid on both sides of the football. And then you got some areas of concern here for some of these Big 12 teams as well. But yeah, you look at the Buffaloes. Again, the wide receiver position definitely is a big concern. They lose Travis Hunter as well at the defensive side of the football, and then also at the wide receiver position. But again, the quarterback position doesn't really concern me that much, considering they lost Shedeur Sanders and everything. But they got a transfer quarterback coming in that definitely can provide a spark for them. Defensively, you look at this team, you lose B.J. Green at defensive end. You lose Travis Hunter, just talked about that. They also lose Shiloh Sanders at safety. I think the secondary definitely is what I'm concerned about for Colorado. There's just really not a ton of depth there at that secondary, and they lost quite a bit there from last year. So, yeah, there's an area of concern for Colorado on defense is definitely the secondary, and then on the offense it's the wide receiver position. And with the amount of losses, that's why Colorado here drops to number 10. They were pretty high on these power rankings last year, but this year they're at number 10 in these spring football power rankings. Moving on to number 9, we got the Kansas Jayhawks. So you're probably wondering, why is Kansas here in the top 10 after coming off a disappointing 5-7 year? Well, Jalen Daniels is back at quarterback. I mean, that's obviously a big reason why, this Kansas team definitely took a big step back, especially after their offensive coordinator left to go to Penn State. But you look at this roster, lose Devin Neal at running back. The offensive line definitely does concern me if I'm a Kansas fan, because they lost, quite a bit on that offensive line. That offensive line doesn't really have a ton of depth either, so that's one area I'm concerned about for Kansas. They lost Quentin Skinner at wide receiver. In fact, they lost 3 good receivers there from last year. They lost Quentin Skinner, Lawrence Arnold, and then Luke Graham. That was one of their top receivers from last year, so maybe the wide receiver position could be a concern. But they added some pieces in the transfer portal there, and that's what I like about the Jayhawks. They added some pieces in the transfer portal in order to, still be in the top 10 in these power rankings, just not inside the top 5 like I had them from last year. You look at this defense, the secondary depth does concern me. Not a ton of depth there on that secondary for Kansas, but you look at the losses. They lose Kobe Bryant at corner, and that's a big loss in the secondary. So if there's definitely a weakness there in the secondary, that's definitely the position right there. But you look at this defensive line, I think they actually have a chance to be definitely solid on that side of the football. So Kansas at number 9 for 2025 in these spring football power rankings. Moving on to number 8, we got TCU. This is another team that, definitely could be a dark horse team in the Big 12 like they always are every year. This is a team that I do expect to be right there around 6, 7, 8 wins, somewhere in that particular win range. We'll start with the offense first. They lose Jack Beach at wide receiver, and they also lose Savion Williams at wide receiver. So a couple of big losses there at receiver for TCU. That's definitely kind of a little bit of a concern, but they added some pieces in the transfer portal at that receiving position. The offensive line, though, is kind of a concern for TCU in my opinion. Not a ton of depth there on that offensive line, and that's kind of the thing about these Big 12 teams like I mentioned. There's just some teams that don't have a ton of depth, and that's definitely for TCU on that offensive line. So that's an area of concern there for TCU on the offensive side of the football. Defensively, not a ton of weaknesses there. They didn't really lose quite a lot there from last year. They did lose quite a bit, but not really that lot and everything. I think this defense has a chance to be pretty decent. It's not going to be one of the top defenses in the country, but it definitely could be a top defense in the Big 12. So definitely keep an eye on TCU's defense, and that's why I kind of put them here at that number 8 spot, is because of that defense. But again, that offensive line definitely is an area of concern there if you're the Horned Frogs for 2025, but TCU here at number 8. Moving on to number 7, this is another team that I feel like can be a dark horse team in the Big 12, and that's Baylor. I put this team in my way too early top 25 back in the month of January. Really not a ton of weaknesses for this Baylor team. Last year, they're coming off a pretty good year, 8-4 season in 2024. This year, they return a lot of experience from last year's team. I mean, they lose quite a bit of production, but not very much. I mean, they do lose like a couple of good players, but I mean, that's really about it for Baylor. Baylor doesn't return, or, Baylor doesn't lose a whole lot of people from last year. And that's kind of the reason why Baylor is kind of getting all this hype, is because of the experience they have coming back. They returned their starting quarterback from last year. So I think Baylor has a chance to be a dark horse team in the Big 12. And I don't really want to go too far with them to be like a top 15, top 10 team. I'm just saying they're kind of like in the bottom tier of the top 25s. And then also, they are just outside the top 5. But I wouldn't be surprised if Baylor does come out of nowhere and definitely has a really solid season for 2025. And it wouldn't surprise me if they can definitely become a dark horse team in the Big 12. It would definitely surprise me if they were to be like in the Big 12 championship. But yeah, Baylor, a ton of experience on both sides of the football. Really not much to talk about here for Baylor, but they're at number 7 here on these power rankings. Moving on to number 6, and I know a lot of people are not going to agree with this one, but it is Utah. You look at this team coming off a disappointing year last year in 2024, but they're well coached. Utah can turn things around just like Oklahoma State can. If there are two teams that definitely can turn things around this year out of the Big 12, it's definitely Utah and Oklahoma State. And I think Utah probably is my prediction to turn things around. Offensively, again, losing Cam Rising at quarterback, yeah, that's a big loss there. They also lose their star tight end from last year, and they lose Dorian Singer at wide receiver. Big loss there. Really, the only concern that I have for Utah is definitely the tight end position. They don't really have a ton of depth there. This offensive line, though, looks like it's going to be pretty strong for Utah. And again, I do expect the offense to be a little bit better. I mean, it's kind of been up and down the last couple years, but I do expect it to be a little bit better in 2025. Defensively, not a ton of depth on the defensive side of the football. They lost a lot there from last year, so maybe this defense could take a bit of a step back in 2025. This has been a really good defense in the last couple years, and this year, I just don't think it's going to be really that great, to be honest. But again, that defense definitely does concern me if I'm a Utah fan. I mean, obviously, they don't really have a ton of depth there, but this is a well-coached team, and you kind of expect them to at least be, in contention to be a Big 12 contender. Last year just wasn't their year. Can they have a better year this year in 2025? And what really is keeping them outside the top 5 is definitely that defensive line, and then also the entire defense. Again, just not a ton of depth there, and that's kind of how they fell here to number 6. So let's go to the top 5 now. At number 5, we got Texas Tech. This is a team that I think everybody is sleeping on here for 2025. This team has a ton of guys coming in from the transfer portal. They have a ton of experience coming back as well. They also return their starting quarterback as well. Really, the only concern that I have for Texas Tech on the offensive side of the football is probably the depth of the offensive line. They didn't really add a ton of players in the transfer portal, but they added some. I mean, I think this offense, though, will be pretty much fine. It should be a pretty decent offense, and I think defensively they're going to be pretty decent there. They didn't really lose a whole lot there from last year either. So yeah, a lot of people I think are sleeping on this Texas Tech team. They do have a schedule that sets up pretty well for them, and I talked about them having the easiest schedule from last week for 2025. I mean it. This Texas Tech team could become a contender in the Big 12, so watch out for the Red Raiders, and that's why I got them here in the top 5 in these power rankings. Moving on to number 4, we got Iowa State. A team that, of course, went to the Big 12 championship from last year. I don't think they're really going to be that good as compared to last season, but still, just like Utah, this is a very well-coached team, and then also same thing goes to like TCU and some of these other teams in the Big 12, which I'll get to in just a moment. But you look at the offensive side of the football for Iowa State, they're going to lose Jalen Noel at wide receiver. Pretty big loss there, and then also Jaden Hickens. So the wide receiver position definitely could be a concern for Iowa State, but the offensive line definitely looks like it's going to be pretty decent. The quarterback position, they don't really have a ton of depth there at quarterback, but I think everything is going to be pretty fine for the Cyclones as long as they stay healthy on the offensive side of the football. Defensively, the secondary and defensive line, they don't really have a ton of depth there on the secondary, and then definitely the defensive line. I think the linebacker position might be the strength of this defense, but yeah, Iowa State, definitely a well-coached team. I mean, they should be like a really good team, every single year. They've had that one bad year in 2023, but that was really about it. I think it was actually 2022 if I'm not mistaken, but This is a well-coached team. They should be able to make it to a bowl game, and I wouldn't be surprised if they definitely made it to the Big 12 championship again. I just don't think they're going to be quite as good as they were from last year, but still, the way they are coached and everything, that's what's kind of keeping them here in the top 5 at number 4 in these power rankings. Moving on to number 3, that's BYU, a team that, was really close to making it to the Big 12 championship last year. Could the Cougars definitely make it to the Big 12 championship this season? Well, you look at the roster, the offense, I think, is going to be pretty good for them, decent as well. I mean, they do got their starting quarterback and Jake Radcliffe coming back, and they don't really lose a ton of production on the offensive side of the football. They have a lot of pieces coming back on that offensive side of the football. Defensively, the secondary is a little bit of concern. They don't really have a ton of depth there on that defensive side of the football in the secondary, but I think this BYU team should be a really good team this year, and that's why you're kind of seeing them here in the top 5 is because of that experience. And this is a team that can definitely become a playoff contender. I don't really know if they're a top 10 team, but they're definitely just outside the top 10, maybe a top 15 type team as well. But yeah, this team has a lot of pieces coming back, and that's why you're kind of seeing them here at number 3 in these power rankings. Number 2 is Kansas State, and I know a lot of people are not going to be really happy about this either, but you look at this Kansas State team, just like Iowa State and TCU, they're just a well-coached team, and you kind of expect them to be like a Big 12, top contender every year, and that's kind of why I put them here at number 2. And also, this offense, I mean, they lose DJ Giddens at running back, but they don't really lose a whole lot there on the offensive side of the football. You got Avery Johnson back at quarterback. I mean, we saw how up and down he was from last year. I think he actually has a chance to have a better season in 2025. Defensively, the linebacker and secondary, I do have a lot of concerns about both of those positions. I mean, they lost quite a bit there from last year, but like I said, they're a well-coached team. They do reload every year on both sides of the football, and they definitely should become a top contender in the Big 12, but I got them at number 2 because of the amount of losses on defense. But at number 1, it's obviously Arizona State. This is a team that, of course, won it all in the Big 12 from last year. Yeah, losing Kim Scadaboo is going to definitely hurt them at running back. The safety position, they do have a little depth concerns there on the defensive side of the football, but everywhere else, I mean, it looks like it's going to be pretty good. Sam Leavitt is back at quarterback. I think this offense actually has a chance to be pretty explosive. It's not going to be one of the best offenses in the country, but it definitely could be like a top 25 offense. Defensively, they should be able to be pretty good there as well. I mean, this is a well-coached team, and we've kind of seen that now since last year for Arizona State. This team is kind of, starting to become like the top program in the Big 12, and they won it all last year. I wouldn't be surprised if they won it all again, and then also if they were able to make the college football playoff as well. So yeah, Sam Leavitt with his return at quarterback and also the returning production for this team, that does make them number 1 in these power rankings, and also they have the most production coming back and also in all the Big 12. So that's the reason why the Sun Devils also ended up at number 1 in these spring football power rankings for this conference. So those are my official Big 12 football power rankings for the upcoming 2025 college football season for the spring. Let me guys know what you think about these power rankings. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.